Like an hour or two after our call the other day, that guy from Fox News issued an apology for
I
saying
did
he
see
wanted,
that.
yeah, sorry, my lizard self came out, you know?
Yeah, what would we even call the people on They Live? Because they're not lizards, they're like skull faces or
Yeah.
something, some weird kind of creatures.
We should just do the They Live episode because, like, it's so on point for everything that we've been talking about for the last 4 months or however long we've been doing this.
Y'all ready to jump into the book?
What the hell does that even mean?
What you getting at with the book script? Spit that shit out, man!
When I was your age, television was called books.
Wait a minute. What's your favorite book? You got the book!
In my hand, Doc! You got it in my hand!
Burn it!
Tells me that goose-stepping morons like yourself should try reading books instead of burning.
Welcome back to Propaganda Loves You Book Club, where we are continuing our talk about The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, written by the Davids Graeber and Wengrow. Last time we talked about Chapter 3 and some interesting stuff going on with what's called prehistory, this era of human history before evidence of writing and things like that. And, we learned that human beings have always been human beings, and they've always been making conscious political choices about the way their societies work. And they aren't like chimpanzees or bonobos. They're like human beings who make choices about what they're doing with their lives. So I really enjoyed that chapter a lot. And I think with this chapter, I'll be interested to hear what you guys really resonated with in Chapter 4. But the title of Chapter 4 is Free People, the Origin of Cultures, and the Advent of Private Property. And I feel like there are a lot of definitions in this chapter. They give some basic definitions of some really core concepts. And I thought that might be one place to start. Right at the beginning of the chapter, I think on the third or fourth page of this chapter, they kind of give us this thought experiment or this idea about, as history progresses and technology gets more and more advanced, we have this idea that the world gets bigger and bigger and bigger for people. And they sort of flip this assumption on its head. Right here, I'm specifically thinking about page 122 and 123. And what seems to have happened is that ancient humans traveled a lot more often and in greater distances than we like to think, and collaborated with each other over really, really vast distances. And so what's actually happened in our time period, even though we have all this advanced technology and technically have the means to move around a lot more, people tend to stay in the same place. So as technology gets bigger and bigger and more advanced, people get more and more stuck and stay in the same place and travel less often. I just thought that was an interesting kind of counterintuitive assumption that they're asking us to consider here. Did you guys take anything from that?
I kind of thought about, my dad visited Ellis Island lately, and my brother tracked some of the family history of where they went through like Poland and up and, took the boat and everything. And I thought, like, if I had modern technology at the time and I knew for certain, like, these places, whatever, I could make a more informed decision than like a myth of the place. So maybe that's part of it. America being a promised land of opportunity and freedom. But like, if you actually had the internet pulled up, you'd be like, what are these ice raids? I'm not going there. I got to get out. So, it's like maybe there's more information, but also like definitely, yeah, it definitely makes us all stuck. I don't know. I guess I also thought about the fear mongering that like tech even brings into us. And so creating these like communities or states are also like, it's a power move by oligarchs to keep us, taxpayers here, I guess.
It almost is like if people have more information, I'm just listening to what you're saying, Arthur. It's like if they have more information, then they can decide if they really want to go visit these places or not. But when people didn't have that, right, then they only had the myth of what was there. And so they would travel and they'd find out themselves. It was almost like the land before time. Like, like we're going to go to the valley beyond or whatever it is. But it also made me think of like if people have all that information, then maybe well, I guess it's like a couple things. One, like, people today, and I think it talks about this a little bit later in the chapter, but a lot of people don't have the money to travel. And if travel before was literally your entire village, like going on an adventure together, it's not like And maybe we don't look at travel that way anymore. We don't look at it as like a communal thing. It's like you're going on vacation and you're going to go to, someplace and spend a lot of money or something like that. Maybe the whole thought process behind what travel is doesn't have the same utility that it had, back
Yeah.
in those days or something.
That makes sense. That like travel kind of turned into this like product revenue stream in
We
tourism in
commoditized it.
general. Yeah, yeah, totally. And it's not about adventure. You're totally right.
Yeah, that's true too. Because you plan to travel now, you assume you're taking care of yourself the whole time. You gotta make a plan. You gotta have an itinerary. You gotta have reservations. You gotta have all this stuff. And then back in this, like you said, land before time era, it's like there's just this common assumption that people are hospitable. If you find people wherever you go, they'll take care of you. We don't have that anymore. If I go to some place I've never been before, I'm like paranoid, like, oh God, where are the resources I need? What's all this stuff? Where's safety?
Yeah.
They like Arthur, you were saying about the oligarchs and like the narratives they build about their places and stuff. It kind of weirdly, the more information makes us kind of paranoid about other places, and we don't assume that people will take care of us, which sucks. I feel like maybe the 60s, the hitchhiker era was the last time there was any of that left, when you could just like, I don't know, I'm sure it was dangerous, but people, it seems like from what we read about that time period, people could reasonably just sort of go hitchhiking and not die or get murdered or whatever.
Part of the movement, right? Like this whole, yeah, it's interesting.
Okay, what about this on page 126, this definition of egalitarianism? We've just in our regular podcast and all the conversations we've had, we've talked about these egalitarian ways of life and what it means to have an egalitarian society and stuff. And so I thought I'd read the bottom of this last paragraph and then that first full paragraph on 126, just to give us something to talk about in terms of what egalitarianism actually means. So as a first approximation, this is from the book, we can speak of an egalitarian society if, one, most people in a given society feel they really ought to be the same in some specific way or ways that are agreed to be particularly important, and two, that ideal can be said to be largely achieved in practice. Another way to put this might be as follows. If all societies are organized around certain key values, wealth, piety, beauty, freedom, knowledge, warrior prowess, then egalitarian societies are those where everyone or almost everyone agrees that the paramount values should be, and generally speaking are, distributed equally. If wealth is what's considered the most important thing in life, then everyone is more or less equally wealthy. If learning is most valued, then everyone has equal access to knowledge. If what's most important is one's relationship with the gods, then a society is egalitarian if there are no priests and everyone has equal access to places of worship. I thought that was a great definition and explanation of what this all means. So what does that mean for our society? What are our values, and what does it mean about, are we egalitarian? How far away are we?
Yeah, I like this idea of like egalitarianism meaning the most precious resources equal in a way. I guess I just kind of thought about like nationalizing oil and how bad that is then in the face of like capitalism, how it's always just like, but really if we were egalitarian, oil would be nationalized, I guess, because that's our most precious resource to capitalism. But really interesting.
You get an oil field and you get an oil field. Nobody's drinking anybody's milkshake.
It's like in some like oil-rich countries, like in the Middle East, isn't that like? I mean, they don't do it in an egalitarian way where everyone reaps the equal benefit from like that resource, but they do have like national funds that are basically funded by oil, right? Like, and then that's distributed in some way that allows like the Saudi royal family to be like, the richest like thing in the entire world. But still, like, yeah, it's interesting. This isn't the right way to think of or I don't say what's right or wrong, but I guess like when I think of resources initially and thinking about like what are the most important resources that we have in America, like, yeah, like oil or anything like that drives the economy comes up. The way that I was thinking about it, it's not really a resource. It's like money is not, I mean, it can be a resource. Usually it's like what gets you other resources, but we treat it as the most important thing. I think, in the United States. That's really like and it's, I mean, very clear that not everybody has an equal share of the wealth in the United States, if that's the most important thing. And then just like on a personal level, I don't know. I think of time as a resource. And I think of that as like more important than money, right? Definitely. And I think most people would actually agree with that. But the thing is, money gives you time, right? And like we also do not have that because people are constantly trying to just have enough money to survive. And that takes time because they have to go work, right? So I guess that's kind of where my head goes with what I think about as the most important like resources. It's not a great movie, but In Time, I think Justin Timberlake, they had like a whole parallel with this where people literally like you just were paid in time, and then when you ran out, you died.
Yeah, totally. They had like a time calculator on their wrist or something. I kind of remember it. Yeah. It's a cool concept. That's really interesting that you go to time, though. I think that's definitely better than oil. Yeah.
The government putting numbers on your forearm is not a good look. So that's what that made me think about in that movie. I resonate a lot with what you're saying, Cody, about money and time and the relationship between them. And that's like not calling you a Marxist, but it's a very Marxist way of looking at it, because that's what in the Marxist analysis money is it's congealed labor time. It represents actual human labor time spent creating value. And then the money is a representation of that time. So your money is literally like little time souvenirs. I've had conversations about retirement money and like things that, you if you're able to save up a bunch of money and you end up saving for retirement or whatever, you're saving for time that you plan to spend. So whatever money you're able to put in the bank, you can look at that as time in the bank. You can add up your expenses and you can calculate how many months of your basic needs you could take care of with that money that you've saved up. And that's how much time you've saved up, essentially. You could think of your emergency funds that way.
Yeah.
But that's coming back to this, like, what is in this U.S. society that we live in, what is the value of the certain key value of our society? And they give all these examples in parentheses, like wealth, which we've mentioned. Two other ones that I thought we could talk about are freedom and knowledge. Thanks to the internet, and if you're skillful enough to use it wisely, we kind of do have an egalitarian world in terms of knowledge access right now. I think people at this moment in history have more access to free knowledge on the internet than at any other time in history. So that is one thing that is at least one thing we could say for our society, is that maybe they didn't do it on purpose, but we all have access to all of this knowledge. I always say Wikipedia is like the best thing that the internet has ever done.
Isn't it crazy? Like, you think that's maybe where we're egalitarian, and that's literally where, like, one of the things that's being attacked right now is the ability to actually, like, use that knowledge in a way that, like, to understand, right? Like, diluting it, spreading fake information, making it hard to understand what's real or not, like going after Wikipedia, like all these things, like trying to take that away. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, defunding all the NPR and any sort of federally funded news. Yeah.
The probably main key value that our leaders purport us to have in this country is freedom, right? That's also one of the values they list in parentheses. I don't want to jump us too far ahead in the chapter, but they do talk about freedom in a very specific way later on. I think that these freedoms they mention at the bottom of 132, top of 133, play a bigger role in the later chapters. But there are these three specific things they mention. So I'll just read like these two sentences. They talk about defining freedom in specific ways. They say, the freedom to abandon one's community, knowing one will be welcomed in faraway lands, the freedom to shift back and forth between social structures depending on the time of the year, and the freedom to disobey authorities without consequence, all appear to have been simply assumed among our distant ancestors, even if most people find them barely conceivable today. So these three basic freedoms, the freedom to move, to just go away from the community you're in, if you want, the freedom to change the way you're living in a hierarchical way, maybe you want to change and live in a non-hierarchical way, and the freedom to disobey any authority figures that present themselves without serious consequences. to what extent do we really have those three basic freedoms right now?
I mean, directly right now, I think we're going to talk about this when it comes to freedom of maneuver, freedom to move, right, and freedom to travel. Like, they're talking about being able to strip U.S. citizens' passports for their political views or their alignment to what they consider to be, anti-American groups. So, like, that's a big one right there. That's pretty concerning if the U.S. wants to be able to strip its own citizens' ability to travel or leave the United States.
Yeah, I mean, you literally can't go to certain countries, right? I mean, you might be able to travel there via a different country once you get to it, whatever, but there's like bureaucracy involved, and you can't go live somewhere else without some highly bureaucratic papers, right? And like shifting back and forth of social structures is a complete joke right now. Like, no, there's literally a two-party system that we've been in for hundreds of years, and disobey authorities without consequence. Like, literally, people are getting killed over that. So, not great.
We don't have any of those.
Yeah. It just makes me want to say, like, anytime a leader is like, oh, America's the land of the free, just like define it specifically. What do you mean? What are we free to do? Because it sounds pretty unfree in a lot of ways.
Well, we can own a lot of guns if we want to. So
that's freedom.
I feel like that's really the definition they're going for.
Freedom means pew pew. Yay, freedom. No, I just thought that these basic definitions of freedom were very helpful in making me realize how bad it is where in this time and in this place that we happen to live in. Because it's just like, if I want to test my freedom, I could just go outside and start walking wherever I feel like walking. How long until I run into a fence or a border or a security guard? Even if I just want to walk to Mexico, at a certain point, I'm going to hit a wall, I'm going to hit a checkpoint, and someone is going to demand, like you're saying, Arthur, some papers. The French philosopher Jacques Derrida has this brilliant essay. I can't remember the French phrase for it, but it's basically paper is me, and how your papers as a human being in modern society define your humanity. And it has to do with immigration and everything. But you see that now. It's like, if you don't have the right documents, your humanity is reduced staggeringly, depending on where you go. And so you can't move. If you want to move, you can't move. Somebody's going to stop you and demand some paperwork or whatever. Even the way, like, we can't change the whole structure of our society, this freedom to shift back and forth between social structures. But even at the small scale, even on the family scale, like your individual family unit, you can, like, I'm in a polyamorous relationship, so we're kind of experimental about the way we're structuring our family life. But at the same time, the government only sanctions certain kinds of choices. If you want the government benefits and the rights that are given to spouses under the law, you have to have a certain kind of spouse and a certain kind of way that the government approves of, right? And so even at the small scale, just choosing who your partners are and how you want to arrange your individual family unit, that's already limited to a large degree. You can only shift so much before your rights are curtailed in one way or another. You probably heard horror stories about gay partners who, when they're not legally married in certain states or in certain times, and then their partner's hospitalized, and then the hospital says, oh no, you're not family, you don't get to come in here, you don't get to see your partner or whatever. Like, we're already limiting that to a large degree. And then, like you scoffed at, Arthur, the freedom to disobey. Come on. You're going to get shot or put in jail, like, immediately.
Yeah, or like fired for an opinion online.
Yeah. The only disobeying that well, I mean, and this crosscuts all sorts of administrations, but like the disobeying that we're allowed to do in the United States is apply for a permit to be able to protest in a designated location, right? Like that's the allowed disobeying. That's what you can do if you want to voice your displeasure with the authorities without any repercussions, right?
Remember like
Probably
the 9/11 protesters though? Like they had them like you couldn't actually protest. They had them like sanctioned off in like a different area even.
Yeah, they control where you're allowed to voice your opinion. Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
can go like you could go out and like call for like Joe Biden's head in a, whatever,
Sure.
and you'd be
Yeah.
praised. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that like the value system, yeah, you can disobey democracy, I guess.
Joe, there was something else you said there that was interesting, like the way that we will look at relationships in the United States, right, and like the legal definitions there and whatnot. And I think it was like trying to remember where this was in the chapter, but it was talking about how like some of the Native American tribes and whatnot that they had looked at, the chiefs, we talked about this I think in the previous chapter, but like they didn't have like the authority to actually tell people to do things. They had to convince people. But some of the things that they would get is possibly more wives that they would have, but not because like they're the chief so that they can have all these wives. It's like you're the chief, so you got to put on a lot of things for the community. You're going to need more wives to like do these things. But the wives could go and like, yeah, I'm just going to go with this other person, right? Like there was no control there. It was literal freedom of, do what you want in that scenario or that type of relationship.
Yeah. I think one example they gave is like if a wife wanted a divorce, she would just put her husband's things outside the hut
Yeah.
and be like, "There you go." It's like that Beyonce song in the box to the left or whatever. Like, bye.
Oh man.
Yeah, there was a quote on, it goes from bottom of 130 to 131 that I highlighted that I think kind of gets to this point that we're talking about, where he talks about the Wendat society and, these indigenous cultures experimenting. And I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but they say in this, Wendat society with its elaborate constitutional structure of chiefs, speakers, and other office holders might not seem to be his choice for inclusion on a list of egalitarian societies, but chiefs are not really chiefs if they have no means to enforce orders. Equality in societies such as those of the Wendat was a direct consequence of individual liberty. Of course, the same can be said in reverse. Liberties are not really liberties if one cannot act on them. Most people today also believe they live in free societies. Indeed, they often insist that, politically at least, this is what is most important about their societies. But the freedoms which form the moral basis of a nation like the United States are, largely, formal freedoms. And I thought it was kind of interesting, he goes on to talk about these play chiefs, which I think we touched on last time, and how it's kind of like they had chiefs with pretend power because they couldn't actually enforce things. And now we have these
With fake freedoms.
fake free, exactly.
Yeah. It's like in the middle of that next paragraph where you were looking at.
Nice.
It's like the second or third sentence. Yeah, in this sense, it is almost possible to say the Wendat had play chiefs and real freedoms, while most of us today have to make do with real chiefs and play freedoms.
Yeah, I love that. I love that like inversion. That was really nice.
I want to go back to having silly fake kings we can make fun of while we get to enjoy our real freedoms. Enough with this bullshit.
Do you guys ever watch the movie Mystery Alaska? Have you ever seen that movie?
Mm-mm.
It's a Russell Crowe movie. I think it was from like early 2000s, but it's about this tiny town in Alaska that is like super into hockey. And so like the New York Rangers end up going and playing a game against this like small town hockey team in Alaska. But the reason I bring it up is because there's a couple scenes in there. It's a super small town, like a couple hundred people or something like that in this town. And they have multiple town meetings where literally the entire town is in this giant hall. And like there's the mayor and he's like explaining the problem. And like half the town is just like giving him shit. Like he's like, this would be really good for the economy. And they're like, what economy? Like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, but it just reminded me of that, like, like it's obviously not the exact same thing, but it felt similar. Like everyone has a voice, everyone can like talk about what they think and they truly believe and make their case. It wasn't the mayor saying this is what we're gonna do. It's this more communal. Let's all talk and try and figure out what the right thing is. Interesting.
Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like his power was very fragile, right? Like he was probably aware of like if he says the wrong thing, this is going to fall apart quickly.
Yeah.
Like that's how it should be.
Yeah, it was funny. I think there was even a line of like, we can leave it to the town council if you want. And everyone's like, no, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, having direct feedback in that kind of representation is really important, and also maybe like shorter term limits or term limits at all. Like Supreme Court, like they're just for life.
Yeah, forever. Yeah.
Yeah, not until dementia, not
Yeah.
until you can't write or speak coherently. Even after all that, you still get to keep your power. What are we doing?
I did have something on page 134, if you guys are ready to move to a next thing. So as I was reading through, I kind of highlighted a couple things here on page 134. So basically what it's talking about is just like how we think about work and, you know, what we think of as work in our society versus what some of these other early societies might have thought of as work. And it's comparing it to like what occurred during different times. So I'm just going to read through that. So suddenly there existed forces of production previously undreamed of, but there was also a staggering increase in the number of hours that people were expected to work. In the new mills, 12 to 15-hour days and 6-day weeks were considered standard. Holidays were minimal. John Stuart Mill protested that all the labor-saving machinery that has hitherto been invented has not lessened the toil of a single human being. As a result, over the course of the 19th century, almost everyone arguing about the overall direction of human civilization took it for granted that technological progress was the prime mover of history, and that if progress was the story of human liberation, this could only mean liberation from unnecessary toil. At some future time, science would eventually free us from at least the most degrading, onerous, and soul-destroying forms of work. In fact, by the Victorian era, many began arguing that this was already happening. Industrialized farming and new labor-saving devices, they claimed, were already leading towards a world where everyone would enjoy an existence of leisure and affluence, and where we wouldn't have to spend most of our waking lives running about at someone else's orders. That was interesting that in the Victorian times, they were saying like, oh, we're on track. Like we're getting to the point where everyone's going to be rich and everyone's going to have time off. And then it's followed directly by, granted, this may have seemed a bizarre claim to radical trade unionists in Chicago, who as late as the 1880s had to engage in pitched battles with police and company detectives in order to win an 8-hour day. That has obtained the right of a daily work regime that the average medieval baron would have considered unreasonable to expect of his serfs. So like just those like I loved pairing those two things together, how they did that. And it also made me think like about, yeah, like we literally used to have, you know, workers fighting Pinkertons, like literal like guns shooting at each other, battles in the United States over workers' rights. Like, so yeah, interesting to me there.
Absolutely, yeah. In terms of labor struggle, that people have had to fight and often die for every ounce of reprieve from just like 7 days a week, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, whatever they can get away with, really. I think I'd mentioned on a different episode another book I used to teach sections of by a guy named Malcolm Harris. He wrote a book called Kids These Days about a millennial generation and the way we were educated and taught to think about work or whatever, but he uses this example of a kid who finds a clever way to do his homework twice as fast, and instead of his teacher rewarding his ingenuity for figuring out a way to do it twice as fast, she gives him twice as much to do. And so that's sort of the lesson with labor and technology, is like when the technology comes about and, oh, I can do my work in half the time, you don't get half the time, you just get twice the work in the same amount of time. The technology always serves the capitalist who owns it, not the worker who's doing the labor.
Yeah. You think after, what is it, 100 or 200, whatever amount of years, I don't know, like, but we might see that pattern, like, didn't work with the Industrial Revolution, didn't work with the agricultural, didn't work with the internet boom. It's clearly not working with AI, right? Maybe the next technology is going to do it though.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's like the propaganda, the false promise of leisure has been around forever, and they just keep perpetuating it. And yeah, like what you guys are saying, like under capitalism, technology just increases the labor because we obviously have to keep profits up and the baron satisfied. So it's interesting how the exploits just become more efficient for the rich.
And right on the next page, so like that's talking about what, you know, society's talking about as far as labor goes, like these 15-hour days. And then it starts talking about like what that actually looked like for forager societies. And so on page 136, it's the third paragraph down. I want to read this as kind of a comparison. So, true, a forager might seem extremely poor by our standards, but to apply our standards was obviously ridiculous. Abundance is not an absolute measure. It refers to a situation where one has easy access to everything one feels one needs to live a happy and comfortable life. By those standards, Solons argued, most known foragers are rich. The fact that many hunter-gatherers and even horticulturalists only seem to have spent somewhere between 2 and 4 hours a day doing anything that could be construed as work was itself proof how easy their needs were to satisfy. So it's just, promising since the Victorian era that we'll get to this point where we'll have leisure, and these individuals had what we've been promising through industrialization.
Yeah, the propaganda goes so hard on word. Like, we have been conditioned to think of productivity, and it's like, I need to be productive today. Just the concept of productivity, it's like a poison that's getting into our heads. Like, the idea of someone only working 2 to 4 hours a day, immediately our culture is like, lazy. What a piece of shit. 2 or 4 hours a day, that's it? Lazy. But like, this is what humanity has been doing for most of the time that we've been around. It's only this last little sliver of human history where we've gotten all backwards and contorted about it. Yeah, that is a great paragraph, though. Like, thinking about what it really means to be rich, what it really means to have abundance of time, the relaxing state of mind that comes about when you realize that everything you could conceivably need is right there, or easily accessible. Yeah. That's a much healthier way to think about what it means to be rich.
Yeah. Time and I'm sure there's got to be studies on this, but probably just mental well-being of not forcing yourself to work for something that you don't enjoy or a lot of people probably actively hate, but you don't have a choice, right? Like, you're doing that or you're on the street if you don't have any other support network.
And so there's the immediate example, I think 2 pages later on 138, of humans actively rejecting agriculture because they can see the amount of work that's about to be involved, right? Were you guys ever taught that ancient human civilizations learned about agriculture and then decided, nah, no thanks, we're good the way things are? I never learned about that.
No. I was
Definitely
taught, cow plus farm equals society.
Which, thinking back to it's kind of like surprising because we are taught about like some of the Native American tribes and like, oh, they had maize and stuff like this, but they didn't have the same like structure that we had just because they were able to farm maize, right? Like, they could do that, but they're like, we can also pick up and leave whenever we want, like go somewhere else. We don't have to make it like the only thing we do.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do farming and to do agriculture and to sort of scale up food production. And I think some of the later chapters get into it. I just vaguely remember hearing them talk about like people in floodplains areas, how like certain times of the year, these massive rivers would just flood. And then as the floodwaters receded, they would start planting in that damp soil right after the water recedes. And so it's just like a lazy way to do farming that's very efficient. The water's going away. It's going to be soggy and wet for a long time. So just start planting everything and then just sit back and watch it grow and reap the rewards later.
Yeah. And I think like what's interesting is we talk more and more about this in the life. I guess it's just this book in general is maybe a thought, but like, I think intuitively, like I understood this, but it's crystallizing my brain, right? The lifestyle that a lot of these tribes had is impossible today. And it's impossible today because of nation states, because of private property, because of like all the laws, regulations that might come around for the United States. Like, you couldn't live as a tribe in the United States that follows the buffalo herd as your primary source of food and plants and wherever you happen to end up. And like, it's just not possible. Like, it like literally would not be possible in today's society, I don't think.
No, I agree. And that reminded me that maybe we can save this for when we're ready to wrap up the chapter. But the end of the chapter, get into good definitions about what private property is.
Yeah.
which I think connecting it to taboo is a really interesting way to do it. And then this discussion about our whole legal system is built on the Roman example. And so we can talk about what Roman law means in these three categories they give, but maybe that can be like the wrap up for the chapter. If there's anything else in the meantime you guys want to talk about here.
I didn't know about Poverty Point at all, like before starting this book or like listening to it. Like I'd never heard about that. It was kind of like hard for me to imagine. I guess as I was reading through or listening through that was like I was thinking about the movie that Mel Gibson did a while back. I don't know. It was like, but it just because it was like, I think it was like about the Aztec society. And it was showing like thousands and thousands of people all coming to this one location and meeting in these like huge societies, like all these groups coming together for these religious ceremonies. So it kind of reminded me of that. And like, it was like, man, it'd be great. It'd be so cool to like actually be able to see that when it was thriving, right? Like, or like, what did that look like when all the people were actually like gathering at this location, right? And what was that interaction like? Going back to your point earlier, Joe, about like, you know, today people would probably, you know, if they're traveling, still keep themselves feel like they need to protect themselves. But if like that time, it was very common, like everyone just arriving at this location all at the same time. I don't know. It's just like really interesting to me thinking about that and like what that could have looked like.
Same. I had no idea about Poverty Point either. I loved that, like, yeah, they're like obviously experimenting with different ways and how like agriculture in general, I guess like their argument is like how it doesn't lead to like statehood and how farming societies like Poverty Point avoided like these permanent elites. So it's really interesting. And I had no idea about that. So it was really cool to, read all about it, picturing it too.
Yeah, it like does something to your imagination.
Yeah.
That just feels energizing and, you know, like cathartic almost. But as you were saying, as you were talking, Cody, a second ago about these people coming together and gathering and stuff, think about these little outlets that our elites give us to tap into that a little bit. And if that's what's going on with mass sports culture or even things like Burning Man, you know, just allowing us to pretend to have this thing that we all used to have, even for a short period of time. I don't know.
Yeah.
Burning Man always sounds dirty to me, like I'm going to come back with sickness or sand all over the place or something. It's never really appealed to me, but some people are really into it.
Yeah. I think it is dirty. From what
I'd still go.
Yeah.
I'd still check it out. You know, I thought Mardi Gras was going to be really dirty when I went, and it was right. It was very, very dirty down there, but it was super cool too. So, you know, new experiences.
What's that like? You know, I've only been in New Orleans like twice or something, and one time just walking down that one street, the
Urban
famous
Street?
yeah, and the smell.
Yeah.
It was like vomit. It was a little off topic, but yeah, after.
But I mean, it's still, I guess, like going back to your point, Joe, like it's still like this tradition that we have of like gathering, right? Like these big events that we still do gather for, right? Like as humans, right? And still happened back then, right? Like they still had these like, it's probably more cyclical and like had more to do with seasons and whatnot, but we still have that, right? It's just very, very different and commoditized and, you know, harder to get to and, you know, all of those things.
Yeah, we need more opportunities for like massive cathartic gatherings that don't require us to spend money and buy products and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, just what's the biggest potluck you could imagine?
Yeah. That would be interesting. Are we going to start? We should start we'll start a festival. I'll start working on it. We're going to have like I don't know, original. This is Free People, the Origin of Cultures. We're going to have an Origin of Cultures festival. Yeah.
Love it. There's also something in this chapter, and I don't think I made it good notes for it because I can't find it quickly, but they were talking about this one society on the Gulf side, the Gulf of Mexico side of Florida, this sort of tidal region culture. It's like they were having this argument, the writers of this book were having this argument with other researchers who find it strange when they find forager societies in places of abundance, because most of the examples of forager societies that are still around today are foraging in a world where capitalism has taken over all the good spots. And so, of course, they're just foraging in these areas that are left over. When you remove that context and you can forage wherever you want, obviously you're going to forage in places of abundance, like where the fish are, where the food is. I just thought it was really cool, that example he gave of what's the king's name that was in the Florida Society? I can't find it now.
Was it Calusa?
There was,
Yeah. I guess it's the, oh, wait. Yeah, okay. So the Calusa was the tribe, and then Carlos was his king or paramount chief. Carlos? Really? That's such a strange name. Or it feels strange, but maybe that was like a common name back then.
Yeah.
Like, who knows?
Could be the OG.
yeah, Calusa was the name of the group,
Yeah.
and then Carlos was, yeah, Carlos feels like a name a white person just slapped on there. It doesn't feel quite right.
So we're not quite sure how to translate this. Carlos is close enough.
Yeah, so he seems like one of those leaders who or maybe began in one of these seasonal societies, but then started to sort of entrench his power and make it more permanent and sort of, hey, let's stick around. Let's keep foraging here. Keep doing what I say. So, yeah, I think one thing I really appreciate about this book is how many different examples of possible ways of having a society there are. Like, it's very all over the place, the different possibilities that we can find in history.
Yeah, that was interesting. I guess a big takeaway from that, and this wasn't just this chapter, it's kind of been a theme across the book. And you said it, Joe, was talking about how even those different societies, nothing is a monolith. There is no monolith, right? Like there's nothing that we can say this is definitively the way that people lived. They all kind of had different variations on that. So yeah, I think they're laying that argument out very well throughout the book.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, I'm just going to read the title of chapter 5 as a teaser, I guess. Chapter 5 is called Many Seasons Ago. Subtitle, Why Canadian Foragers Kept Slaves and Their Californian Neighbors Didn't, or the Problem with Modes of Production.
So yeah, just leading right into that.
Yeah. I like how they, in the chapter, they kind of talk about like property beginning relationally with like people and not just like land, I guess, and that myth. And then also like this whole like invention of culture idea that we have. And I thought about like Simone Beauvoir, who says like, you know, one is not born but becomes a woman, something like that. I don't know, it's probably off, but I just thought about like, yeah, how like this societal, like these forms that we are born into need maintenance and our consent a bit, you know, to whatever, to live into them and you know, prop them up. And really they should be maybe more seasonality, like, you know, try to see like what works, what fits, get rid of something that doesn't work. But the mutability of the whole, I guess, the stagnation that we just find ourselves in, of like the exact same thing since the industrial whatever, you know, it's just like it's time to change it up. And it's hopeful to like read all this and to have all these examples, because it has been done.
Yeah. It's inspiring.
Yeah.
It's like it creates a little bit of a, like, I don't know, a little sense of urgency for me. Like, why are we still doing this? Like, why are we still stuck? Like, we have this information. You know? You were saying that Simone Beauvoir thing, and like, I don't know, just about the maintenance aspect of keeping up the ruse. It made me think about like a dusty old room. You know, if you have a room in your house that just starts to feel stagnant after a while, and you're like, the vibe's just off in here. You know, it's time to move the furniture around, change the decor a little bit, switch it up, make it different. Oh, it feels new again. This is nice. This is exciting. We need to do that for our society.
Totally.
On a larger scale.
I've read about that too, like with like redesigning rooms and layouts, and it's really healthy for your mind too. So like, come on, it's got to just be beneficial. Yeah. I was kind of saddened, you know, like obviously the Locke like theory of like labor and agricultural argument like justified dispossessing indigenous tribes and a lot of like just atrocities and horrors. So like showing philosophy as like a weapon and a tool of the elite too is saddening. Yeah.
I mean, they call Curtis Yarvin the tech philosopher, right? Like, Like,
Forgot about that guy for several weeks until you said his name again.
sorry.
Ugh. Maybe we could talk about, since we're leading into it, this private property definition. You know, we like to protect private property in this country and think we all have a right to private property. I just have always, before I even get into what the book says, I've always appreciated delineating between private and personal property. Like, people have a right to personal property, like my toothbrush or my clothes that I wear or whatever. But then private property, on page 159, they give this great breakdown, pulling from Emil Durkheim. They say much of this is implicit, if never clearly stated or developed, in Emil Durkheim's classic definition of the sacred as that which is set apart, removed from the world and placed on a pedestal, at sometimes literally and at other times figuratively, because of its imperceptible connection with a higher force or being. Durkheim argued that the clearest expression of the sacred was the Polynesian term taboo, meaning not to be touched. But when we speak of absolute private property, are we not talking about something very similar, almost identical, in fact, in its underlying logic and social effects? And that immediately, my dad used to try to take me hunting when I was a kid, and it immediately made me think about those signs on the trees when you're just driving in some area and it's like private property, keep out. Like, same exact thing. Set apart, don't touch it, this is mine. There's nothing that any indigenous group would ever think to do with an arbitrary section of land. Okay?
I think that's what I was kind of like thinking when I said like you couldn't live in that society now, right? Like, it's just along with what you're saying, Joe. Like, if you were a hunter-gatherer society and you spent 6 months in one place and then traveled halfway across the country and followed different herds of animals and hunted them, like you said earlier, how long before you would be stopped? Like, it could be a fence, it could be a cop saying, why are you 12 people traveling along this way, right?
Yeah, like connecting private property with this religious concept of taboo, I thought also it points out the obvious weirdness our culture has with private property, of how it's like this superstitious kind of thing. Like, I don't know, the audacity of someone else to come onto your private property. Like, that's what these stand your ground laws are about. You can legally shoot and kill people who cross an arbitrary line that you believe belongs to you. How is this not a religious behavior?
Well, I don't think most people would think of it that way. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of it like, and when I say I wouldn't have thought of it that way, I don't mean like I would shoot somebody if they came on my property. What I mean is like, I guess I wouldn't have made those connections like of private property being a thing that didn't exist unless you actually research it. It almost feels normal, or it does feel normal growing up. Like, I would have never thought that private property wasn't always a thing, right? Like, but like through learning about this, it's like, oh yeah, that really doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, in the way that, at least in the way they lived, like, why would they want a concept of private property, right? It would kill their lifestyle.
Yeah, the only other quote I wrote down was on 162, which I think summarizes this exact thought. They wrap up the chapter, I guess, saying, like, looking back at prehistory, talking about these sort of religious rituals. They say such carefully coordinated ritual theaters, often laid out with geometrical precision, were exactly the kinds of places where exclusive claims to rights over property, together with strict demands for unquestioning obedience, were likely to be made among otherwise free people. And yeah, I thought it was an interesting thing to connect it to this sacred thing. I think earlier, too, they talk about Carlos having some, like, private rituals to, like, renew nature or something. Ring a bell?
Yeah, and they had like objects too. Like, the only private property in these societies to speak of were these religious objects, like a staff or a bowl or something, and like only the religious leader is allowed to touch it. And that's like the first conception of private property.
And I think I actually highlighted a couple things on the page before that, and Joe, this goes into what you were talking about too, as far as like how different groups looked at ownership versus property, which I thought was super interesting, especially with the comparison to like the Roman, what does ownership mean? For the indigenous groups that they were talking about, it was more about when you say like you're the owner, I think in our terminology, more like you are the steward or caretaker, right? Is more of that kind of feeling than like, oh, I own this thing and I control it and I can do whatever I want with it. It's more of like, you are responsible for this. You need to make sure that this thrives, right? Like something that's very different than the Roman one, which is basically like, yeah, you control it and you can do what you want with it up to destruction, right? So I'll read that real quick. It is not unusual for ethnographers working with indigenous Amazonian societies to discover that almost everything around them has an owner or could potentially be owned, from lakes to mountains to cultivars. Yeah. Groves and animals. As ethnographers also noted, such ownership always carries a double meaning of dominion and care. To be without an owner is to be exposed or unprotected. In what anthropologists refer to as totemic systems of the kind we discussed for Australia and North America, the responsibility of care takes on a particularly extreme form. Each human clan is said to own a certain species of animal, thus making them the bear clan, elk clan, eagle clan, and so forth. And what this means is precisely that members of that clan cannot hunt, kill, or harm, or otherwise consume animals of that species. In fact, they are expected to take part in rituals that promote its existence and make it flourish. It's like how they look at ownership, very different than how we do.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this obligation to steward and care for a resource and to recognize that abundance has a limit, you know? And I don't know. I really like that. I really resonated with that. And yeah, just go ahead.
I was just going to say, if that's your definition of ownership and you're the Buffalo clan, right? And then you have people come in and just murder all the buffalo, like, or you are the, you
seen those pictures?
Yeah.
The mountain of skulls of, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, that's a different kind of genocide.
Yeah. But, I mean, like, I could just imagine the type of reaction I would have if that was my entire life to protect this resource or protect this thing. And yeah, that occurs, but crazy compared to the Roman law one.
Yeah. So our legal system, like I said, is built on this Roman conception of law. And so the very next paragraph after what Cody just read says, what makes the Roman law conception of property, the basis of almost all legal systems today, unique is that the responsibility to care and share is reduced to a minimum or even eliminated entirely. In Roman law, there are three basic rights relating to possession: usus, the right to use; fructus, the right to enjoy the products of a property, for instance, the fruit of a tree; and abusus, the right to damage or destroy. If one has only the first two rights, this is referred to as usufruct and is not considered true possession under the law. The defining feature of true legal property, then, is that one has the option of not taking care of it or even destroying it at will. And that is our conception of law and ownership.
I'm just thinking through the, it's not in the book, but like the, to the extreme that I'm pretty sure Roman patriarchs could like kill their children, right? Like, let me Google that really quick, but I'm pretty sure like that was like, yeah, you owned your like kids at that point too. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I think about this all the time of how children are second-class citizens. They don't have full human rights even now. You can't just straight up kill your kids, but you can do what I consider abuse to your kids and be fully justified under law. Like corporal punishment, beating your kids is totally legal in many ways.
Coming back to a school near you.
Yeah, how weird is that? Like the arbitrary lines we draw. Like when I was in elementary school, our principal also had a paddle, and if your parent gave their permission, the principal could spank the kids. That was still going on. But just how weird we are. Like, oh no, somebody else can't beat my kids. Only I can beat my kids. Like, it's so strange to me. It's so strange to me.
Yeah, it takes a village. Everybody should be able to beat your kids. Yeah, that is a wild concept. Yeah, I guess the only thing I kind of thought about in these was, like, I guess between Roman law of property and these other forms that we've tried, there's definitely like this exclusionary boundary of like who's in, who's out. And it reminded me of the Great Confinement, where like Europe in the 17th century, maybe, started labeling, it was like mad people and sex workers, and they gathered them all up and excluded them and tried to like define rational and irrational. And it's kind of the same thing of like sacred property or private property. It's like excluded, define like what's mine and what's yours, and it's all very like, it's created to like, I guess, protect social order, and it's propped up by the elite throughout all of history. And we get the same story like told to us, like AI is going to solve our problems and we're all going to be living on a beach in a year doing absolutely nothing. And it's just like, this is the falsehood, and this is why we have to revolt. This is just, they're going to be spinning the same like story in 500 years.
Yeah, hopefully if they just don't take away our access to knowledge in the meantime, we can all get on the same page and figure it out before it's too late. I've been sort of keeping up, not rigorously keeping up, but sort of seeing news about some of the, especially Nepal, the Gen Z revolt in Nepal, but also going on in Indonesia and the Philippines and stuff. And there's a flag from an anime or a manga called One Piece that a lot of these protesters are using. It's like a cartoon pirate flag, and it just, I don't know if you guys have seen that anime, but it makes me kind of want to check out what that anime is all about. It's just a little bit I've seen about it. Seems to be like this renegade pirate group who's against a corrupt global government is teaching these kids about things like friendship and solidarity and mutual aid. This anime has lit a fire under these kids in a lot of ways. It's making them actually revolt against their governments and the corruption they see.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Any sign of, if it comes from anime, that's great. I've seen like One Piece, like the trailer, Netflix live action trailer or something, and I've also wanted to get into it as an aside, but I've seen online it's like 1,200 episodes or something, and it's like, it's very long, the arc. So once we got the AI to do all of our work, that's what we'll be watching. Yeah.
Sitting on a beach, watching One Piece, enjoying our pirate booty.
I was just going to say too, Cody, like you're posting this band, like I was like, it's going to be banned in China. It's going to be banned in the US. It's
Texas is working on it, don't worry. Texas will try it before everybody else. If Texas doesn't, then Florida will. Oh, God.
I think that's all I had planned to talk about for this chapter. Unless you guys have anything else you want to wrap up with?
Great 2 chapters. Looking forward to continuing through. It's a super interesting book.
Yeah, just more fuel in the argument that hierarchy isn't natural and surplus and farming did not lead to an inevitable hierarchy.
I feel like the book bounces me back and forth between feeling really hopeful and optimistic and inspired by the stuff we see from the past, and then also simultaneously pissed off and angry about the different ways that we're stuck right now. So just bouncing back and forth between those two emotions with this book.
There was a line in this one of these 2 chapters, and I can't remember which one it was in, the line that was basically like, one of the researchers said that we likely have inherited from our ancestors some submissive dominant traits, but the thing that makes us human is that we can make the choice not to do that, and we've done that in many societies. And I think that's one of the things that frustrates me so much about just where we are right now. It's like, we can make the choice collectively. Like, we could make the choice to live another way, but without having that example, I guess a lot of people don't feel like that is a choice, or they feel like it's not a natural choice to make for some reason. I don't know. But that line, interesting to me. I really like that as a, I don't know if that ties into, who is it? I'm going to try and remember a philosopher. Is it Descartes? Who is the guy that said, I think, therefore I am? Was that?
Yeah. Nailed it.
That's him.
Or he stole it from somebody. Yeah.
Probably.
Colonizer. And just if you're reading, and I don't know, I'm just trying to do a reader-friendly thing because academics and philosophers drop weird words and they don't always tell you what they mean. If you ever see the word Cartesian, if you're ever just reading and something's like, oh, this is a Cartesian this or Cartesian that, it's just a reference to Descartes. That's all it means. It's in the worldview of Descartes. That's what Cartesian means.
I was confused when
unless it's math. I think math is
I think
different.
I saw it as first. It was called like Cartesian math, and I was like, what the hell is
That guy was busy.
Yeah. He kind of came up with the Matrix too. He had this whole brain in a vat, theory. Like, how do you know you're not a brain in a vat? And that's the basis of the Matrix right there.
He was calling simulation theory so long ago.
Yeah. I think it was like a demon. How do you know a demon didn't trap your brain in a vat or something like that? You don't? I guess we don't.
Yeah, could be the
Good
case.
point. Yeah.
Like a metal subgenre of philosophy, just
Yeah.
like goes really hard.
Awesome.
I like book club. This is fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
That's it for book club. Join us next time. We'll be talking about chapter 5 and continuing to expand our view of what was possible in the past and what remains to be seen for possibilities in the present. So join us next time. That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening and hanging out with us.
If you enjoy the show, help us spread the word. Leave a rating or review and share it with your friends, family, or anyone who would get something out of these conversations.
Your ratings, reviews, and shares help this show grow. And the more people listening, the harder it is for propaganda to win.
So until next time.
Stay aware, stay safe, and remember,
Propaganda loves you.